when you have a mother wound, especially generational mother wound, it could feel like the women that came before you, your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother, your great great grandmother, betrayed you in the worst ways possible and have not been doing the work. And this is why you have so much that you were doing. Why couldn't any of them do the work? Why couldn't even one of them just realize that certain things did not have to continue? And these questions and coming to that realization of just how overwhelming the load of the trauma is can evoke feelings of resentment and anger towards the women that came before you. And while that may be true, that is just a lot. I think for many of us, we forget that there's been attempts in our families by the women before us to break generational cycles of trauma. Maybe it wasn't the emotional type of generational cycles of trauma in our families, but there's been poverty, there's been oppression, and there's been horrible marriages that we've seen women in our families take themselves out of. For those that have read my book, The Girl Who Survived Her Mother, I write briefly about my maternal grandmother, and I write also about my mother. I also write about my paternal grandmother. And my maternal grandmother leaves her marriage at a time when it was taboo to leave your marriage, even though she had lost so much of herself in that marriage, and her children were eventually taken from her because in the culture Yabapedi, the children belong to the man. If you are married, the children do not belong to you. This man is renting your womb, and these are his children. And he left her marriage during that time when those rules, those cultural rules were still upheld in society. And she left during that time, and her family also agreed to take her back home, which is also something that is taboo. Most families would not take their child back. In fact, they would let you die where you were married, because it's against the culture for a woman who is married to come back home. Yet that happened. And I want to recognize that as an attempt at breaking a cycle of pain in my maternal grandmother's life, and perhaps a cycle of pain in her children's life. And the only child that she could take at the time was her youngest, which was my uncle. And then also I think about my mother, who had been in this dance with education without a support system from her father, having had a father who said things like, oh, a girl should not be taken to school because she is going to then work for a husband, and there will not be benefit to taking her to the school. And having to do that even when she had children, going to school and attempting over and over to get her matric to better grades so that she can become something, so that perhaps she can get a bursary and become a nurse or a teacher, which is what Black women at the time could be, a teacher or a nurse, and eventually perhaps failing at that. But later on, I saw my mother go back to school, and I saw my mother start a crèche. I saw my mom be a principal to that crèche, and I saw her do great in coming into her power. And this was much later in her 50s, but there has been attempts. Sometimes there are attempts, and I believe that even our great grandmothers and our great great grandmothers made attempts at breaking cycles of emotional pain and perhaps even physical pain. I also write about my paternal grandmother, who attempted to unalive herself, and I think that was her way of ending the pain. That was the only way that she could think was available for her to end the pain. There has been attempts by women before us. They did not succeed in those attempts, and some of these attempts were born out of frustrations and needing to just end it all. And some of these attempts were done out of hope that perhaps I'll come back for the other children. But there has been attempts. And what I'm trying to say to those who have generational mother wounds, who are now doing the work of breaking cycles of trauma in their families and are doing the best they can not to inflict trauma onto their children, I think give yourself grace. It's a lot. And there's been women before you who have tried and perhaps failed because of the time they were living in, and what was possible for them. And you are living at a time where so much is possible, but I also want you to recognize that you are human, and to recognize that you cannot heal it all. I speak to women who say to me, it would be such a disgrace, and they say it that way. It would be such a disgrace if my children inherited even the slightest of trauma from me. I don't want them to be healing from anything from the way that they interacted with me. And in that, I could actually see another form of mother wound forming. When women forget that they are human, that they're going to make mistakes, that they are going to make attempts that perhaps they do not succeed in, that they are going to make poor choices as well, simply because they're human. I want you to give yourself that grace, that you're human and that it's just a lot and that you can't heal it all. And your children do not expect you to be perfect. They expect you to be human and to have healthy shame and to relate to them as a human being who makes mistakes and repairs and make amends. I think that's a better lesson than attempting to never make a mistake and be the one to break all the generational curses in your family. Because when we do that, we forget to live. We relate to ourselves as this project, this thing that needs fixing, this thing that needs to pay attention to all of its mistakes, to scrutinize itself so that it doesn't in any way make a mistake that would harm her children, that would in any way harm those around them. When we do that, we forget to live. We really do forget to live. One of the best advices that I've gotten from someone, I didn't even ask for this advice. It's like, why is this person giving me unsolicited advice? They said to me, life is a journey, and on the journey, we stop and drink water, and we stop and go to the loo, we go to a bathroom break, and we stretch our legs, we get some air, and we don't just continue on the journey forever and ever and ever. If we're going to Cape Town, we're going to stop on the way, we're going to drink water, we're going to stretch our legs, we are going to get some air. Allow yourself that. Allow yourself that. And I want to invite you to also just look at your lineage, the women before you, and the attempts that they have made. Just recognize also that you don't have to complete the whole thing, because despite the amount of work that you are doing, there's going to be places where you lack, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. And they're going to do even much better. There's going to be things that they're going to discover about connections, about our evolution as a human race into becoming better, and that's good.